Hi, my name is Taryn. 10 years ago, I exposed my parents' financial fraud, and they threw me out with nothing but a tote bag and a name they'd already started erasing. They changed my birth certificate. They forged my signature. They made sure I'd never inherit a dime, told everyone I disappeared because I was unstable. But what if I told you they came back? Not to say sorry, but because they needed me. What kind of family teaches you that telling the truth makes you the enemy? And what would you do when the people who ruined your life show up at your door acting like nothing ever happened? The ballroom smelled like money and lemon polish. Crystal chandeliers hummed above Savannah's most decorated socialites, their laughter echoing against high walls that had never known silence. At the center of it all stood my father, Harlan Westfield, shaking hands with the mayor, teeth bared in his practiced smile. The plaque in his hands read, "For a lifetime of integrity and service to our community." I stood by the bar, holding a glass of soda with no ice and even less interest. The crowd cheered as he waved, a pillar of Southern virtue. My mother, Velma, stood beside him in her pearls, her voice light as champagne when she said to me through her teeth, "Try not to embarrass us tonight." Zinnia glowed beside her, perfectly posed in a blush-colored dress that had probably been tailored just for this photo op. I knew better than to be close when the cameras flashed. When the crowd shifted toward the dining area, I stepped behind the reception table. No one noticed. No one cared. Slipping a manila envelope into a stack of city documents, I didn't hesitate. IRS Confidential, handwritten across the front, tucked under the mayor's folder. Then I walked out. I didn't need applause. I needed distance. Back at the house, I kicked off my shoes before I even saw the porch light was still on. Harlan's car was already in the driveway, earlier than usual. The front door creaked open before I touched the handle. He was waiting in the living room, holding a printed copy of the email I thought had sent anonymously. "You turned us in?" he asked. "No preamble?" I told the truth. He stepped closer. "You betrayed blood." Velma peered behind him, silent. She wore the necklace I gave her when I was 10. She removed it slowly, dropped it into the drawer next to the fireplace. "No room in this family for someone who drags it through the mud," Harlan said, voice cold and clean. "You mean someone who doesn't cover for you?" I replied, my tone flat. "Someone who doesn't pretend." "You want to ruin us?" he asked again. "Then you don't belong here." The next hour passed in silence as I packed a canvas tote with whatever I could grab. My sweatshirt, a portable charger, the USB drive with everything that mattered. Nobody stopped me, not even Velma, who watched from the kitchen doorway, her hand around a coffee mug she didn't sip. Outside, the cold bit through my jacket. The Savannah air, usually thick with summer, had turned brittle. The bus station downtown was mostly empty. I curled up in a corner chair under flickering lights, surrounded by soda machines and silence. When I was 13, I won an essay contest for a piece about justice. I came home beaming. Harlan looked at the certificate and said, "It's cute, but don't get ahead of yourself." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't feel much of anything at all until morning, when the light from the station window cut across the linoleum. I walked to the library before it opened, waited outside with the regulars, the quiet ones with bags full of past lives. At 9:05 a.m., I logged into a public computer. I opened my email, attached every document, every spreadsheet, every falsified donation report I had copied from my father's archives. I sent it all to the regional IRS agent, whose name sat quietly at the bottom of one forgotten contact card. I didn't sign it, but I left a note. If silence protects power, then maybe it's time power learns to answer. 2 hours later, I left the library and sat on a bench near the park, watching a family of 4 climb into a minivan. The father laughed, adjusting his son's backpack. The mother checked the back seat twice. They kept their house, their secrets, their names. But I kept something they never saw coming. I sent everything to the IRS with no return address, and for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of them. It wasn't peace, Not really. More like the silence you get after a storm has passed, but left your roof hanging by a thread. 2 months later, a cream-colored envelope arrived at the door of my studio apartment in Durham. No return address, again this time, not mine. The calligraphy was pristine, the kind of handwriting that cost money to learn. Inside, an invitation to Zinnia's wedding. They spelled my name wrong, Tanya Westford. At first, I almost laughed. Then I folded the card, tucked it back into the envelope, and left it on the kitchen counter for 3 days. I didn't know if this was a test or some PR move, if they wanted to erase me properly or pretend like they hadn't. Either way, I showed up. Not to be seen, to observe. The Savannah Country Club glistened with over-decorated effort. Gold-rimmed plates, a string quartet near the fountain, marble stairs polished to a mirror. Velma's signature touch. Everything about the place whispered that failure was unwelcome and image was gospel. No one looked twice when I walked in alone. I was directed to my seat by a girl who couldn't have been more than 19, who glanced at my name tag like it might belong to a food vendor. My seat, table 23, by the service entrance, close enough to smell the shrimp cocktail and hear staff asking where to dump the ice buckets. Around me were people I didn't recognize, one with a baby, another, clearly, a kitchen assistant's teenage daughter. I sat down anyway. No one greeted me. Harlan was too busy shaking hands. Velma didn't blink in my direction. And Zinnia, well, Zinnia was radiant, of course. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfectly chosen everything. As if being adored was a skill she had cultivated since childhood, and perhaps it was. A guest leaned over and asked me, "Are you part of the event team?" I didn't answer. I just smiled, flat, unreadable, and turned away. I stayed long enough to make sure I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't. The speeches began during dessert, delivered under 1,000 lights that made the wine glasses sparkle like staged sincerity. Harlan stood with champagne in hand and said, "From the moment Zinnia was born, she's been the heart of this family. She's our legacy, our future." Velma dabbed her eyes like she hadn't rehearsed that cue. I sat perfectly still. I remembered my junior year of high school, when I placed first in a national writing competition. I brought the trophy home, wrapped in tissue paper. Harlan barely looked up from his bourbon and muttered, "Zinnia got into Princeton. That's the real win." It wasn't that I had failed. It was that I didn't matter. As the cake was wheeled out, I slipped away. I didn't say goodbye. No one stopped me. My heels pinched with every step across the gravel parking lot, so I took them off and walked barefoot. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. The night air was cool against my skin, quiet in a way the ballroom never was. When people leave you out long enough, you stop needing to be included. That night, I realized the ache of being forgotten had dulled into a kind of freedom. I wasn't angry. I was done. At my car, I dropped my clutch. As I crouched to pick it up, a small envelope fluttered loose. The wedding program, folded neatly, still misspelled. I pulled a pen from the glove box and scribbled across the back. "One day, they'll wish they hadn't known just one version of me." I didn't need a courtroom to begin building my case. I just needed a library card and a reason not to let it go. The library in Durham didn't ask questions. That made it the safest place I'd known in years. My studio was barely more than a shoebox with drywall. No couch, no table, just a mattress against one wall, a chipped bookshelf I'd found on the curb, and a second-hand laptop that took 3 tries to boot up every morning. I worked mornings at a coffee shop, evenings at the library. I wasn't broke, but I was very deliberately invisible. Rootless, not homeless. There's a difference. One you choose. By now, I'd memorized most of the vendor accounts tied to Westfield Holdings. I started mapping them out, spreadsheets layered with color codes, lines, arrows, late-night notes scribbled in the margins. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew enough to be dangerous. I reached out anonymously to a former bookkeeper who'd left the company a year before everything exploded. She replied with scanned invoices, real ones. The dates and amounts didn't match what had been publicly filed. Not even close. Late at night, while the librarians locked up, I sat hunched over IRS case guidelines, tracing through statute references and compliance codes. The more I read, the colder my stomach felt. They didn't just bend the truth. They drowned it in formality and bold signatures. Eventually, I took out a manila envelope and wrote one name at the top in neat block letters. IRS Region 4 Compliance. No return address. Just the truth folded inside. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. I mailed it the next morning, hands steady. Then I went to work like it never happened. No confetti, no thunderclap. Just the quiet satisfaction of doing something they'd never expecting the truth without screaming it. Weeks passed. I checked the newspaper every Sunday like clockwork, scouring business sections for signs of movement. Nothing. Some days I forgot I'd even sent the file, then I'd walk past a Westfield billboard, or see Zinnia's face on a local magazine, and feel it all over again. One day, I texted my Aunt Leona. She was the only one who hadn't blocked me after I left. I didn't lie, I wrote. I couldn't stay silent. No reply. Not that day, not the next. I stopped checking after a week. But then, on a gray Tuesday morning, while my shift at the caf dragged into its third hour, my phone buzzed once. I believe you. That was all it said. And it was the last thing I ever heard from her. She didn't answer my follow-up. Her number went out of service 2 weeks later. I didn't press. Some people speak once and vanish. But I screenshotted that text and saved it under the folder labeled Proof. I never deleted her number, just in case. A few weeks after that, I took a delivery job, part-time, extra cash, fewer faces. One afternoon, while dropping off lunch to the city courthouse downtown, I passed by a hallway lined with portraits of award recipients. Men and women lauded for ethical impact and community trust. And there, in the corner frame, was a picture of my father. I stared at it. His smile was perfect. The title beneath it read, Savannah's Pillar of Integrity, 2016. I stood there, still in my delivery uniform, and whispered under my breath, I used to think truth came with applause. Now I know, sometimes it only comes with exile. I didn't linger. I had sandwiches to deliver. That night, I stopped by the copy center near campus and printed out a new URSUM. When I reached the section for occupation, I hesitated. Then I typed slowly, Research Analyst Independent Compliance Support. It sounded vague enough to be believable, strong enough to be real. That's who I was now. If no one would hire me to speak, I'd build a life around listening, especially where no one wanted to be heard. But documents weren't the only things they rewrote my name, my place. Even my legacy had been altered before I ever spoke up. It wasn't a scream that cracked the silence. It was paper. The kind no one thinks to question, especially if it's handed over with a smile and a just sign here, sweetheart. But that morning, I found it. Buried deep beneath layers of estate paperwork in the courthouse archive room in Durham, where the air was dry and the lighting made everything look older than it was. I hadn't meant to find anything. I was just there for volunteer work 2 mornings a week, helping digitize old property records and estate filings while quietly studying compliance law online. It was routine, quiet, safe. That Tuesday, the clerk was late unlocking the doors. I waited outside with a half-warm coffee and a folded printout of my shift schedule. I watched the pigeons argue over crumbs on the steps, pretending I wasn't rehearsing old conversations I wished it handled differently. When I finally stepped inside, the stillness greeted me like an old friend. The shelves stretched far and high, filled with names that didn't matter to most, just history with stapled corners. I usually skimmed, but something made me stop that morning when I reached a file labeled Westfield Non-Testamentary Declarations. I almost skipped it. It didn't look relevant, but I opened it. And there it was, my birth certificate. At first, I smiled. I hadn't seen the original in years. But then I looked again and froze. It was wrong. The middle initial was different, a quiet switch from R to N. harmless to anyone else. But to me, it was a scalpel. I checked the barcode, the filing date, the amendment. 3 years ago. No request, no notice, no consent. Not a typo, a decision. The deeper I looked, the colder I got. Behind it sat another documentone I hadn't seen in over a decade, but I recognized the shape of my own name scrawled across the bottom. A voluntary disclaimer of inheritance rights, filed under the amended name. Validated. Accepted. Irrevocable. My breath caught. Back then, I thought it was a student financial aid form, something Velma had handed me quickly, between packing boxes for college. She'd waved it off, told me it was just another school thing, and handed me a pen. I'd signed it between tears. That was the week of my graduation dinner, the one where they toasted everyone but me. The one where they ran out of chairs, and somehow mine was the one that got lost. It sat at the side table, next to a forgotten potted plant, listening to them praise my sister's internship at a company I'd helped her apply to. I hadn't cried that night, and I didn't cry now. I sat on the cold courthouse floor, holding that document like it was burning through my skin. They hadn't just erased me from the will, they'd made me do it for them. With a pen. With trust. With a smile. I started printing. Every page, every amendment, every forged act of compliance. Then I created a folder. I didn't name it Evidence. I named it Reclaimed. That night, I returned home and sat on the edge of my bed, shoes still on, coat still zipped. I opened my laptop and began building a timeline. Not for court, not yet, for me. Because there's a difference between being written out and walking away. I didn't walk. They moved the floor under me and called it voluntary. I tacked pages to the wall, labeled events, drew arrows, dates, signatures, phone calls, silence. I wrote a sentence at the top in red ink. To be silenced legally is not to be defeated permanently. Then I opened my email. Drafted a message to one of my professors. Quick legal question. What's the statute of limitations on deceptive documentation involving a minor? I read it over 5 times. Then I closed it. They didn't need to know what I knew, not yet. Let them keep thinking I'm quiet, that I'm gone, that I'm grateful. Let them keep underestimating me. That night, before I slept, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to the dark. The best revenge is truth they don't see coming. And on the bedroom wall beside my desk, I added one final note to the timeline. Legal isn't always ethical, but a pattern doesn't lie. Let them keep their secrets. I'm keeping the proof. It wasn't just the letters. It was everything: the forged contracts, the doctored filings, the real estate deeds with my name erased and theirs scribbled in with practiced arrogance. Every lie they built their world upon was now sitting in my hands, sorted and dated, waiting to be dismantled piece by piece. But as damning as those documents were, the words that haunted me most didn't come from a courtroom or a spreadsheet. They came from an afternoon in Raleigh, delivered with a smile, and they cut deeper than any falsified signature. I had taken a temp job at a financial luncheon, nothing flashy, just a front-table assistant managing RSVPs and registration badges. Not a role anyone noticed, which was exactly what I needed at the time. It paid enough, and I could disappear into it. I was alphabetizing a stack of name tags when I heard it, his voice. Harlan Westfield, my father. He swept into the lobby, flanked by 2 men in navy suits, his laugh echoing off the glass walls like it had every time he'd won something, still wearing the same smug assurance he wore like a tailored jacket. I felt my breath hitch, but didn't look up. Then I heard him say it. "Gentlemen, this place is a maze," he chuckled. "But she's just here to make herself useful." He pointed at me. Not a glance, not a flinch, not a second of hesitation. He just gestured vaguely in my direction, like I was furniture, like I was the ficus in the corner, or the coat rack by the door. I didn't blink. I didn't reply. I handed off the last stack of badges and walked away. Not from the job, but from the version of me still waiting for him to see me. I slipped out the back exit without telling anyone, took the long route home through the park, letting the silence stretch across the path like a balm and a bruise at once. My phone buzzed with calls from the office asking if I could cover cleanup. I let them ring out. That evening, I sat at my desk surrounded by timelines, spreadsheets, and binders full of copies. 40 pages now scanned affidavits, notarized signatures, emails with timestamps, every thread of deceit they thought would stay buried. I stared at the wall until the numbers and names stopped making sense. Then I heard the mail slot click. A soft sound. Almost nothing. But something small landed inside. A plain envelope. Handwritten. No return address. I opened it carefully, something about its weight feeling old, like it had waited years to arrive. Inside was a single piece of notebook paper, yellowed, creased, edges frayed. My heart paused when I saw the handwriting. It was mine. Not the one I use now, sharpened by law school and litigation, but younger, more urgent. Like I had written it while holding my breath. And I had. It was a letter I had written to myself when I was 18. A letter I'd tucked into a book I lent a friend before leaving Savannah. Apparently, she found it in her attic and sent it back without a note. The letter read, "If I ever forget what they did, this letter is here to remind me. When they say you imagined it, this is proof you didn't. When they act like you left for no reason, this is why. You were never crazy. You were cornered. And if one day you start believing them stop, you already survived them once. Do not go back. Signed Taryn, age 18. Still breathing." I read it twice, then 3 more times. Then I lit a candle, pinned the letter above my desk, right above the growing wall of evidence. Not legal evidence, but emotional evidence. The kind the law can't measure, but the soul never forgets. In the soft flicker of that small flame, I whispered to no one. That girl didn't break. She just buried herself so she could grow back stronger. Then I scanned the letter and added it to my digital archive. Exhibit 0. Not admissible in court, but permanent in the courtroom that mattered most my mind. They thought I wouldn't speak again, that I had been silenced, forgotten, deleted. But it was never about the volume. It was always about the timing. And now I was ready. It wasn't just a letter this time. It was a dossier, a roadmap, a reckoning disguised as research. And when I turned it in, I thought I might never see the consequences. I was wrong. 3 years had passed since I dropped that envelope. I had traded Savannah's suffocating humidity for the softer air of Asheville, where the trees wrapped around roads like they were trying to protect them from the world. I rented a small townhouse on the edge of the city. 2 bedrooms, though one stayed empty except for whiteboards, printouts, and a growing wall of timelines. I didn't wait for justice anymore. I began preparing to become it. During the day, I worked as a junior compliance researcher for a private firm that handled internal investigations, mostly boring stuff. Misfiled 1099s, expense fraud, the kind of corruption that hides behind tiny fonts and silent approvals. But I liked the quiet, the anonymity. I did my job well, took no office friends, and never corrected anyone who thought I was new to this world. One morning, while cataloging incoming cases, I saw it. Case ID. Winterlight. Client. Federal Office of Inspector General. Scope. Multi-entity financial review. Primary focus, Westfield Holdings and affiliates. My hands went still. I opened the file. At first, it looked like any other. Vendor trails, invoice splits, cross-region reimbursements. But I knew those codes. I'd grown up hearing them whispered behind office doors. WL Systems, Westcar, Fieldcore Dev. They were all Westfield fronts, cleaned and disguised, tied together by paper no one bothered to challenge until now. I scrolled to the source. Case initiated via anonymous submission. No author, no sender. But I knew it came from me. 2 days later, my supervisor handed me the file. They want you to coordinate Winterlight. You've handled complex reconciliations before. Think you can manage it? I nodded. In silence, I accepted a case where I was both the ghost who opened the door and the architect tasked with closing it. For the next 3 months, I worked late nights. Unmatched payments, conflicting bank wires, vendor duplication, it all connected. And every page I opened felt like flipping back through the diary of a house fire I barely escaped. I never disclosed the overlap. No one asked. They thought I was meticulous, methodical, efficient. They didn't know I was also the girl they'd erased, now building the wall they'd one day crash into. By spring, I had mirrored their operation down to the last invoice trail. Every dotted line from the foundation to the fake scholarships. I cross-referenced it with the archive I kept hidden in my guest room. Nothing contradicted. Every lie I'd suspected was confirmed in triplicate. But justice isn't just data. It's endurance. I began cleaning up my own digital life. New passwords, separate accounts. I updated my will because spite has no place in legacy, and I wasn't going to leave my future entangled in their mess. I backed up my archive to 2 encrypted drives, one stored in a safety deposit box, one mailed to a trusted contact with no context. Just a note. Open if anything happens. Once a week, I saw a therapist who specialized in high-stakes trauma. I didn't tell her everything but enough. "I'm not angry anymore," I said in one session. She nodded. "Then what are you?" I paused. "Ready." I wrote the words across a post-it and stuck it on my wall. Above it, another note read, "Not revenge, not rescue, just record." They hadn't just underestimated me. They taught me how to see every seam in a lie, how to follow it backward until the thread led straight to their hands. One night, I stayed late to close out a week's worth of files. As I was powering down my terminal, my boss stopped by. "You may need to appear for testimony," he said. "You've been listed as internal coordinator on the case." I kept my expression neutral. "Of course." But inside, something quiet sparked. Let them walk into a room and finally see what I've become. 3 weeks later, the names were posted officially, legally, and publicly. On the federal subpoena list, right there in bold, Zinnia L. Belarus, Harlan V. Belarus, Velma C. Belarus, and mine, Taryn R. Shipman. I wasn't surprised. I'd submitted the final evidence packet myself. What did surprise me was the sound of tires on my gravel driveway at 8:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning. From the kitchen window, I didn't need to see the plate. I knew that car like I knew every contour of my old life. The headlights blinked once before shutting off. I'd just been organizing trial exhibits, fraudulent grants in one pile, forged vendor receipts in another, sticky-noted and color-coded. I paused, moved the curtain slightly, and there they were, 3 ghosts trying to look alive. Zinnia got out first, still hiding behind her daughter, using her like a human shield in a war she started. Harlan followed, shoulders tight, his tie suffocating him more than any courtroom ever could. Velma, of course, was last gliding out as if she hadn't lied on an affidavit 2 years ago. Her smile arrived before she did. Too polished, too rehearsed. I didn't open the door, not right away. I let them stand on the steps I'd scrubbed myself, stare at the wreath I hung, feel the stillness of a porch that no longer belonged to them. I waited. When I did step out, I didn't smile. I didn't ask if they'd had breakfast. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Zinnia tried first. "We just want to talk." Velma chimed in, her voice soaked in syrup. "We miss you." I blinked once. "No, you don't. You miss control." That's when the little one spoke, Zinnia's daughter, 6 years old and too sweet for any of this. She looked up, gripping a plastic bracelet, her voice carefully shaped. "Grandpa says only you can fix it. Please help us." The words were gentle, rehearsed. They sat in the air like a question I wasn't supposed to answer honestly. I looked straight into Harlan's eyes. "You still send messengers, even when they're 40 pounds and can't spell embezzlement." He didn't respond. He never did when the truth didn't ask permission. I let my gaze sweep over them, once powerful, now just people trying to plug a dam with press releases and desperation. "If you want to talk," I said, voice steady, "meet me Thursday, 9 a.m., Federal Courthouse." Velma blinked. "Why there?" Because that's where I work. And with that, I stepped back inside, locked the door, walked over to my calendar, red marker, a big X over Thursday. Trial day, internal testimony. The day arrived with low skies and a soft drizzle, like the world was nervous too. The courthouse was quiet but not empty. A few journalists, a few auditors, and them. They sat in the gallery. Third row. Velma's hands were shaking in her lap. Harlan's jaw was clenched so tight it looked carved. And Zinnia had shrunk, not in body, but in brightness. Gone was the sparkle, gone was the effortless charm. Fear sat on her like a heavy coat. I didn't acknowledge them. I had no need. I wore black. Blazer pressed, binder in hand. When they called my name, Taryn R. Shipman, internal case coordinator, I stood. I raised my right hand, took the oath, and opened the binder. Page by page, I outlined everything. Wire transfers disguised as reimbursements. Slush funds buried inside community grants. One so-called charity that never helped a single person. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just confirmed. Date, document, evidence number. Their empire, exposed in their own handwriting, spoken aloud in my voice. Not once did I mention our last name. I didn't need to. The truth didn't require context, it just needed sunlight. When I stepped down, I didn't linger. I didn't wait for reactions. I walked past them, past Velma, reaching for my arm with trembling fingers. You wouldn't really destroy us, would you? She whispered. I didn't stop walking. You already did that, I said quietly. I'm just confirming the paperwork. They thought court was the final act, that the worst had come and gone. They were wrong. This was just the middle. The next chapter wouldn't take place in a courtroom. It would unfold in my own home, under my roof, on my terms, where they no longer had keys, or control, or a seat at the table, where I had the final word. And I wasn't afraid to use it. This was never their story to end, but they kept trying anyway. 3 days after the hearing, on a quiet Tuesday morning, I sent one final message. Just a single line, but it carried everything. To Zinnia, if you want to talk, come Saturday. No lawyers, no lies. I kept it short for a reason. It wasn't a request. It was an opening a carefully baited door I knew they couldn't resist walking through. Saturday came with stillness and sunlight. I woke early, made a fresh pot of coffee, and quietly arranged 4 chairs in the living room. One for each of them, one for me. I lit a single candle by the window, not for show, but for presence, for truth. On the center of the dining table sat a sealed manila folder. Next to it, a small wooden picture frame face down, its back turned to the ceiling like a secret waiting to be heard. At 9:03 a.m. sharp, I saw their car pull into the driveway. They stepped into my house like it was still theirs, like I was still the little burden they had carried too long and were eager to drop. Zinnia entered first, her voice low and polite. Thanks for inviting us. I said nothing. Velma took a moment to glance around, her lips twisting slightly. This place is cozy, she muttered, as if the scent of lavender offended her sense of superiority. I didn't humor it. I looked straight at Harlan. He wasn't speaking, just eyeing the folder like it was rigged to detonate. I served the coffee in silence, setting mugs on the table slowly, intentionally. Before we start, I said, someone else has something to say. Velma's brows pulled in. We thought this meeting would be private. It is, I replied, but it won't be silent. I turned and walked toward the hallway. From the kitchen, Leona stepped forward, holding a white envelope in both hands. Velma gasped, an audible catch of breath. Zinnia's shoulders tensed, Harlan's eyes narrowed, his posture stiffening like he'd seen a ghost, and realized that ghost had teeth. Leona said nothing. She simply walked to the table, placed the envelope beside the folder, and sat down. That's a notarized affidavit, I said. She wrote it herself, about what she witnessed. 10 years ago. The room didn't move, didn't breathe. Velma's grip on her cup turned white. This isn't what we discussed. No, I cut in. This is what you've spent a decade avoiding. I reached for the picture frame, turned it face up. It was a child's drawing, faded crayon lines on yellowed paper. 3 stick figures holding hands, scrawled above them in thick orange marker. My family never lies. I let the words settle in the air before speaking again. You tore up every document that mattered. But you forgot this one. Velma blinked, eyes glassy but dry. Trembling lips, no words. Zinnia looked down, her hands in her lap. Harlan leaned back and exhaled through his nose, slow and tight. I didn't speak to fill the silence. I let it thicken, hang heavy like fog. It belonged there. Finally, I said quietly, I'm not here for an apology. I don't need your guilt. I need you to see what it looks like when the person you erased survives. Velma finally found her voice. We didn't know how else to protect the family. I looked directly at her. So you made me the threat? When I was never the problem? Zinnia parted her lips like a thought was forming, but nothing came. She closed them again. I walked over to the table, picked up the drawing, then the affidavit, walked them both over to the bookshelf. I placed them beside a legal ethics textbook and a photo from my graduation, the one none of them had come to. I didn't bother framing that photo for years. Now it sat in plain sight. This will never go to court, I said, looking over my shoulder, but it will never leave this house. Leona stood, hands folded in front of her. She didn't look smug. She didn't offer a smile. She simply nodded at me, then at them, and disappeared back into the kitchen without a word. They followed, one by one. No hugs, no questions, no asking to stay longer. Just the silence they had once weaponized now returned to them like a mirror. Harlan was the last to reach the door. He paused, looked back over his shoulder. You were always too smart for your own good, he muttered. I met his stare. Not cold, not cruel, just clear. No, I said. I just stopped confusing silence with peace, and I shut the door behind him. Not really. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a release, a way to exhale, to close a chapter, not tear out the pages. 1 week after everything unraveled, I sat in my kitchen, bathed in late morning sunlight, with a mug of black coffee and a blank sheet of paper. No legal jargon this time, no lawyer's watermark in the corner. Just me, a pen, and the space to say what needed saying, not out loud, but on my own terms. I didn't write fast. I wasn't in a rush. I let the words come like a slow tide, familiar, steady, and deeply felt. This isn't closure, it's clarity. You taught me that some homes come with locks you'll never have keys to. That family can say, I love you, and still abandon the parts of you they never understood. But I stopped starving. I stopped asking. And I built something better without pretending. No signature, no date. I folded it carefully and placed it in the back of my journal. No envelope, no intention to mail it. Some letters are written only to free the hand that holds the pen. Later that afternoon, a whisper of news made its way into the state business column, quiet and clinical. No splashy headlines, no dramatic images, just a sentence buried in the bottom half of the page. Westfield Holdings agrees to comply with federal audit findings and surrender select properties after evidence of internal misconduct. CEO Harlan Westfield to resign, effective immediately. There was no mention of Velma, no retractions, no apology. But a week later, her name was quietly removed from every board and committee she had fought to belong to, one by one. Without announcement. The world didn't stop for it. No one outside our orbit noticed. But I did. Then came the knock. A courier, not a family member, not a reporter. Just a man with a signature slip and a certified envelope from a law office. I opened it slowly, uncertain of what I'd find. Inside, a single-page legal order. Per judicial ruling, your name has been reinstated on all official documents regarding the Westfield Trust. I stood there for a moment, holding the paper. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just folded it in half and filed it under a folder I labeled Final. not because everything was resolved, but because I no longer needed it to be. Justice isn't always a gavel strike or a courtroom revelation. Sometimes it's quieter, a name reappearing, a title corrected, a chair left empty at the next fundraising gala. That weekend, I hosted a small dinner at my place. Nothing flashy, no press, no grand speeches. Just a few close friends, warm food, and laughter that didn't ask for permission. Leona brought wine and refused to let me clean up. We talked about books, gardens, memories, not lawsuits or legacies. Zinnia's daughter, my goddaughter, was there too. Curled up at the dining table with a pack of crayons, tongue sticking out in concentration. At one point, she tapped my arm and handed me her latest masterpiece. A drawing. 4 people, all smiling. In the center, me. "Who's this?" I asked softly. She beamed. "It's you and me and Auntie Lee and Daisy." Daisy, her pet hamster, was wearing a crown in the picture. I smiled, then carefully pinned the drawing to the fridge, right next to one I had made when I was 6. A crayon sketch that read, "My family never lies." I didn't throw the old one away. I didn't move it. I let both drawings live side by side, the past and present, equally real. About a month later, I received a holiday card from Zinnia. No message inside, just a photo of her daughter holding a book I'd given her months ago. A children's guide to ethics and kindness. No caption, just a smile. I didn't frame it. I didn't toss it. I placed it neatly into a drawer. A quiet place for quiet hope. That winter, I was invited to speak at a law school seminar about financial ethics and trust transparency. After the talk, a young woman stood up and asked, "What do you think is the hardest part of justice?" I paused, then answered, "Sometimes surviving your family is the most honest legacy you can leave." They clapped, but I wasn't looking for applause. I gathered my notes and stepped down from the stage, heart lighter than it had been in years. Not triumphant, just lighter. That night, I returned home to find an envelope on my doorstep. No stamp, no return address. Just my name on the front in my mother's handwriting, still elegant, still restrained. Inside was a small white card. One line. "We were wrong, but we don't know how to be right." I stood at the door, reading it once. Then again. I didn't tear it up. I didn't clutch it to my chest. I simply closed the door. Slowly. Carefully. And for the first time in years, I breathed. Not like someone bracing for impact, but like someone finally standing still without armor.